I'm delighted to be here today and to speak to you about ethics. But I should kind of tee this up by saying usually this type of a session with executives is done over an 8-hour period, over a full day. And now I have taken that and brought it to you in a 30 to 40 minute period here. Now there's a danger to that. And the danger is that it can become trite. Me standing up here saying, do the right thing. Like the teacher in the Charlie Brown cartoon, right? And actually, even at that, I can't even do that well because guess what? You are all cooked. You have already reached your stages of moral development. You reached it at about age 15. Your web of values is formed, and so you are cooked. But what we can talk about, though, are some of those complex decisions around ethics that you might face in the workplace. And maybe I can set some context for you and also introduce you to areas where you might be faced with ethical dilemmas. And maybe even if I have about 3 minutes at that point, give you some tools to work through those. So that's kind of the goal I have today, is to just kind of introduce you to those areas where you might be faced with an ethical dilemma. Now, here's another caveat to this presentation. I teach strategy. I teach undergraduate and graduate level strategy. And so you will see that ethical leadership here is framed in the big picture of making money. Believe it or not, making money. Because that's the outcome goal of a strategic plan, is to perform. Oh, but wait a minute. Not just financial performance, but social performance as well. Now with that tee up, here we go. What exactly is ethical leadership? I made this up, by the way. The ethical behaviors of executives that influence others to achieve organizational goals. I say that I made that up, but really it takes into account, again, my message here, that ethical leadership is a core part of a strategy of a company. It helps you align your core competencies with your outcome goal of good financial performance and good social performance. So I am selling you on ethics. But you probably already know that because maybe at some point in time you read a book by Peter Drucker. Oh, I hope you have. And if you have not, then you've read a book by someone that I might say borrowed many ideas from Peter Drucker, because if you go back to 1954 with the practice of management and pull out his first book, you will see a lot of the dialogue around ethics and missions and goals and visions that our current CEOs and maybe even you use in your dialogues. And look at what Peter Drucker, the father of management, says. Leaders communicate in the sense that people around them know what they're trying to do. They are purpose-driven, yes, mission-driven. Effective leaders check their performance against goals. Wow, this sounds like a strategy class and not an ethics intro, but they also find out whether they pick the truly important things to do. Again, my point here is that ethics is a key part of your strategy as a business to do the right thing. So it's part of the strategic management process. I would say that the strategic management process begins and ends with ethical leadership because we've seen and read and hopefully not experienced too many of those stories where poor ethical leadership has killed a company. I mean, I stay in business because there's always a scandal to talk about. What do you think this is? Anybody want to guess? Yes, it is from the front page cover of a strategy textbook. Where is ethics? Ugh. It's way over on the right-hand side under strategy implementation. And that's a problem. Ethics, ethical leadership begins, I said it begins and ends, right, with your corporation. So it should overlay on top of all of this. It's not just about how you implement the right things in your business. It creates the culture. You create the ethical culture with your leadership in an organization to carry through all those goals and objectives and tactics to make money and do the right thing. So here we go. So you're going to hear me say strategic leadership and ethical leadership. I'm going to intertwine those things a little bit. So when I say, what do you think of, or who do you think of, when I ask, name a good strategic leader, these are some examples that others have come up with for me at different sessions I've had in businesses. Anybody want to add one to the good leader column? You don't want to name someone in your organizations? Come on, this is usually an easy one. I'm teeing that one up for you. The fear factor. This is where you're all like my students. You're looking at your toes. You're looking up at the ceiling. Good leaders. How about bad leaders? Ugh. You may not know all these names, but you probably recognize some of them. And I've done a lot in biopharma, and because we're in Massachusetts, I figured I'd couch a lot of these in the biopharma, biotech industry. What's the difference between the good leaders and the bad leaders? The success of their companies, right? The success of their companies. So the good leaders are associated with companies that have performed well, right? Bad leaders, not so good. What else? Pardon? Okay, resiliency as part of it. Transparency. Oh, you're all in the good column. What about the bad column? How about corruption, illegality, price fixing, price gouging, right? So you can see how important ethical leadership is in the eyes of the stakeholders, in putting individuals then, CEOs, and maybe even you, CFOs, in these columns based on the performance of the company. So when we look at bad leaders, what do we see? Well, maybe it's a style issue, right? Leadership styles that don't mesh with the culture, tolerating low performers. You're reading this and you're thinking, oh yeah, I've had that experience at one point in time. Maybe a lack of vision at the top, a failure to identify problems, too much talk, and not enough action. Gaps between strategy and execution, all of those things leading to poor financial and social performance. And now you're saying, well, where's the ethics? Again, ethics overlays on top of this. Because if you have unethical behaviors, then it doesn't matter about your style or your skills. You're going to still end up in the bad column. Maybe you've seen this before. Maybe you got this book as a graduation gift from your MBA program, or maybe high school. This is from the book Good to Great. They were given out at a lot of conferences for a while, right? That was your take home. I don't always pull from practitioner-oriented journals or books, but I like this. I really like this pyramid because I would throw out there that I know all of you are at least a level 3. You're a competent manager. That means in Drucker terms, I always purr about Peter Drucker. He's awesome. It's too bad he's dead, but anyway, he's awesome. A good manager has to be both efficient, and now I'm in your space, efficient, but also effective. You need to be doing the right things. And if you're doing that, then you're at a level 3. But what bumps you up? What puts you to the top of the pyramid? Building enduring greatness through a combination of willpower and humility. A tall task. I actually don't know, forgive me if I'm offending you, but I don't know too many top management team members that are humble. You have to have a little bit of hubris, right, to keep. But here we're talking about humility in the operations of your business, right? I'm teasing, by the way. I'm teasing. Got to lighten up the audience a little bit here. So, what are the complex strategic issues that require complex strategic decision? And I'm just throwing these up here. Whoops. I'm throwing them up here because we're going to be talking about this last column, ethics. But since you're all CFOs, I thought I'd throw up there some other complex strategic challenges that you have. Change management. How many of you have gone through change management in your organizations? Yes. We teach whole courses in change management, right? Stakeholder management. How many of you are familiar with that term? Oh, fewer hands raised, but there's a whole process of stakeholder management, managing your stakeholders so that you're satisfying as many of them as you can. All those who have a claim in your business. Lots of literature out there about stakeholder management. Again, another course. I actually have an exercise that I like to do, and I'm making these slides available for you afterwards so you can click on all these links if you want. We'll have Becky send them out or something. There's an exercise that you can do. It's from my textbook. It's called the Hondo, where a company is deciding whether they should move their plant across the border to Mexico to evade EPA emissions requirements. Oh, an ethical dilemma. An ethical dilemma. But there's a way to map your stakeholders on a map to come up with the answer, which is work with the EPA to clean up the stacks. So let's move on to, the core of our conversation here, ethical leadership. What are some of the challenges that you have in these complex areas, and specifically ethical leadership? Well, we break this down to the cognitive, the social, and the structural. And it sounds like you've had some conversations around these areas already today. On the cognitive side, those heuristics, the way you think about decisions, myopia, the potential for going in with a tunnel vision, things like image and identity that you make decisions based on. On the social, we're talking about your power differentials, your networks, and on the structure, your reporting structures. Now, don't worry, I can see the eyes glazing over. I'm going to go into your place now. On the heuristics, let's talk about the cognitive. One of the big challenges I've heard from CFOs, again, I heard it's been discussed a little bit, is management of the Ceo Cfo Interactions. And you'll see I'm citing scholarship that's been done in these areas around problem areas that lead to, if not ethical challenges, leadership challenges. So for example, when one is more confident than the other, the CEO versus a CFO, how can that influence some of those complex decisions? The pessimism or the optimism of one or the other regarding, in particular, M&A can be a huge problem or challenge. We'll put it as a challenge. Myopia, there's a lot that we discuss in academe about the decision horizons and the differentials between the CFO cranking out quarterly reports, but hopefully with a long-term vision, and a CEO who may or may not have a shorter-term vision of the organization. Now, I told you I'm a corporate governance scholar. I write a lot about these agency issues between the CEO as the as the negotiator for the future of the corporation in many M&A deals, and the opportunities for opportunistic behaviors. Lots of biases come into play whenever we're making decisions, right? And they overlay and influence us. There's a nice little link. You can look through all of these. But what can we do about some of these challenges? What can we do about the committee power differentials or the information asymmetry between a CEO and a CFO? The CFO's the insider with all the goods. You guys have the information. The CEO's job is to manage that, but also be the external liaison. And that's a differential in information that can lead to challenges. What can be done about these things? Well, you've probably done some of these in your businesses. Cognitive, you may, first of all, being aware that you have differences and different approaches and different biases. Maybe you've brought in consultants to help you manage some of these relationships. Maybe you set up some constructive debate. That's an Alfred Sloan quote about fostering good conflict in your decision making. Maybe you've created some social opportunities within your organization to gather more information and to share across units in your company. Maybe you've actually changed the structure of your company to reduce some of these power differentials by structure. So those are all like strategy 101 fixes. But what about the complex issue of ethics? Those things are all great, but ethical dilemmas in business are a particularly complex area. And that's where you top management team members are supposed to be providing guidance in this area. And ethical dilemmas can be particularly challenged because when we're talking about dilemmas, we're not talking about good versus bad. We're talking about moral imperatives. Both ways look good. So what are we going to do? They're framed as conflicts of values. Listen to this. Conflicts of values. And it's usually the economic as one value and other stuff over here. So, as an example, maybe you all remember reading the story of Chiquita. Chiquita having to move their plants from, senior moment, Central America, South America. And they were challenged because they were employing counter-terrorist groups to ensure the safety of their employees. Economic here, safety here. That's an ethical dilemma. Or how about this one? I've written in my textbook a lot about dead peasant life insurance policies. How many of you are familiar with them? Dead peasant, I didn't make that up. That's how they're called. Dead peasant life insurance policies. Anybody? So these are riders on executive policies, but they're taken out on lower level employees. And for many years, they were allowed to be done without being transparent to the employees on whose lives they were taken out. Yeah, it sounds kind of icky. But actually, it's an ethical dilemma because there are norms. We do this. You probably have life insurance policies taken out on you. So if the plane goes down for your company, they're covered, right? So why not slap a rider on top of it for lower level employees? And by the way, if you want that case, I'll be happy to send it to you. It's trademarked, but I can give you the permission for it. But that's an ethical dilemma. Economic. What's on the other side? Look at our choice. Fairness. Is it fair? Is it honest? Is it transparent? By the way, I was really ticked off of my husband when I wrote this case study, and I kill him off in the first paragraph of the case. He's the one that they look for the death policy for. So these are ethical dilemmas. These are what we frame as ethical dilemmas in business. And they're different from causes of unethical behaviors. So this first category, causes of ethical problems, these are the things that cause poor ethics or bad behaviors. So like your performance, you've heard about this, performance pressures from management. Number one cause, according to surveys, of bad behaviors in business, unethical and illegal. Performance pressures. And you may remember these stories in the early 2000s, the WorldCom days, the Enron days. Remember when Bernie Ebbers was getting carted off to jail and he's yelling, "I didn't know any better because I was a PE major in college." That's what he says. That's in the transcripts. And then he points to his CFO and says, "He made me do it for the quarterly earnings reports." So performance pressures from management. Number one, the behavior of your superiors or peers, and this is where it's on you to set the ethical tone. Now I do sound like the Sunday school teacher, I'm sorry. Personal economic pressures, weak ethical leadership, poor moral climate in general Overconfidence, we talked about that, right, with CEO, CFO problems with overconfidence for one or the other. These are the causes for ethical, really unethical, maybe illegal, and those are different, they're not the same, because you can have things that are ethical but not considered, there are things that are unethical that are not considered illegal and blah, blah, blah. But ethical dilemmas are created by context. And I've told you about dead peasant life insurance policies. You know, there are examples every day. Direct-to-consumer advertising, I write a lot of cases, quite a few cases actually for different contexts, but direct-to-consumer advertising becomes an ethical gray area. And as a point of that, I will tell you that I can recall my daughter running in and grabbing me at the age of 13. She's 28 now. And she grabs me and she's like, come here, you need to see this, you need to see this. And she goes, I need to get this. And I'm looking at an advertisement for birth control pills. 13. So I went into my happy place and I said, I thought you and Preston were just friends. And she said, what are you talking about? And it was because they were advertising for acne. It would clear her skin up. Direct-to-consumer advertising and the opportunities for misinformation. Not deceptive, but opportunities for misinformation. Those are examples of ethical dilemmas for those companies. That's a dilemma. And it's created by context. It involves what we call a ranking of values. So, typical context for ethical dilemmas, where do you see this? Human resources, number one context for ethical dilemmas for entry-level positions, for entry-level. This is where my students will screw up. They will be in charge of hiring, evaluating, and firing. Those will be their first decisions. And there are opportunities for ethical dilemmas there. Social profiling, implicit bias, realistic job previews. What does that even mean? Now we're all about onboarding, right? To make sure we can avoid some of these things. Appropriate mentoring. I cannot tell you how many cases I've heard about mentors who are bullies. So these, again, we're not talking about unethical yet, because actually when you interview the mentors who were accused of bullying, they think they're mentoring. Interesting. Conflicts of interest. Now I'm in your zone again. Information asymmetry. What about the M&A deal? When we have venture capitalists or financiers, and I used to be one of them, I was a commercial banker before I went back to school for my Ph.D. What about those individuals who are the broker? They've got the information on one side and the information on the other side, and they are the keeper of the information to give and take as they will to bump up the price, right? The possibility for conflicts of interest. I told you I'm a corporate governance researcher, and proxy advisory firms are driving me nuts right now because they've got inherent conflicts of interest, but they serve some good purposes as well, so I'm conflicted. Multinational conflicts. We were talking, there you are, we were talking about taking your companies to different areas where there are different norms. And we know that it's not illegal to offer some monies to get your stuff off the dock because that's transportation, but when does it fall over into graft and bribery, and now you're corrupt and you're in violation of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act? So these are all somewhat dilemmas. I've heard Raytheon speak to that, by the way, many times. Customer confidence. How about differential pricing? Differential pricing issues. Drug pricing in different countries, for example. Same drug, but you can pump it up. Or let's put it simply, going to the movies in the afternoon versus going on a Saturday night. Same product or service. There's an ethics issue there. Product safety, notification timeframes for recall notices. Big data. There's a case in my textbook that we've written about Target. How many of you are familiar with the Target story where the father was receiving mailings in the mail from Target? Remember? And it was related to diapers and baby products, and that's how he found out his daughter was pregnant, because she had been shopping at Target and they were direct advertising, and then he turned around and sued Target, blah, 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 blah. Guess what, by the way? My students don't care about that. My students don't care, in general, about protecting their sales, their consumer information. They really don't. They're all about sharing. So I've learned to move with the times. Again, ethical dilemmas are created by context, right? That's what I said, created by context. And contexts change. And privacy and use of big data for the millennials doesn't seem to be as much of an issue. Truth in advertising I talked about, use of corporate resources. When you fill out a recommendation for somebody applying for college and you do it on your company's letterhead, you are saying that your company endorses that individual. That's not quite fair to the company. Sorry to personalize a company. But that's an ethics issue. Now, what do you do when you are faced with an ethical dilemma? Here's your tool, your take home, right? The first thing you'll do is you should look around. What are the norms and the standards? But unfortunately, the first place you're going to look is the law, which is a norm or standard. And you're going to say, it's okay, it's not illegal, right? But we know the law is the minimum standard for an ethics perspective. So there are other standards or norms. You may look around. For example, you might remember the PwC case, the travel expense controversy, where PwC was keeping the rebates for their customers when they were booking travel arrangements for them. It was a big thing about 10 years ago. I always have to be careful when I say that because PwC is a great company, but it's a public, you can read about this case. And so, but there was a norm and a standard for that existed out there. For example, when you travel on your company, you claim the frequent flyer miles, right? You keep them. You don't give them back to your companies. So there's a standard out there for that practice. So you look for standards, norms, and comparisons. But then you should move to the what should you do. We call it the shoulda, woulda, couldas, the prescriptive approach. And this is where we have to dig deep. And this is where we often forget to do this. Because just like my MBA students, I said you're cooked, right, from a moral development standpoint. But what we can do is begin to look at these situations with a moral lens and realize that even these businessy things have a moral component to them. And so there are three things you can do. Think about what are the consequences? What are my duties? And then, what is the motivation here? And these three basic things, what are my, and we could go through philosophical things, again, a whole day training, I'll take you through these things, but think about the consequences, think about the duties, and think about the integrity or the motivation behind behaviors. And then you will put these things together. The descriptive approach, the woulda, shoulda, couldas, and you'll dig deep in your web of values to figure out what you should do. So that's a simple tool. Let's practice. You ready? I got a minute, right? How many more? 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes? I don't know. Ken, you were smiling. Here you go, Ken. Just pick one if you can pick one out of there. Do we have a microphone? Okay. Let me see which one you got, Ken. Let's see if it's a good one. He can't open it up. It's a little. Okay, this is a good one. Okay, would you read your ethical dilemma?
Corporate resources. You have just been hired out of your graduate MBA program to work as a commercial lender for a major bank. Part of your job is to call on customers. You drive to different businesses and often meet your customers for lunch or dinner to discuss the banking relationship. You were given a $500 monthly expense limit on a corporate card with no instructions. But you observe that your peers use it for gas, parking, and client lunches. Your manager signs off on your expenses every month. At the end of your first month on the job, your manager walks around the office and asks the team whether anyone would like to go to lunch at a nice restaurant in the building. 6 of you join him for lunch, At the end of the meal, your manager looks around the table and asks, who has money left on their expense account this month? When you raise your hand, he says, great, lunch is on you this month. What would you do?
Thank you. Oh, nobody wants to answer that because we are in a room of CFOs. Please practice your tools too. So tell me, what would you do first? And then?
So I would take out my card and pay for the lunch. The manager has asked who has money left over. I have money left over. The manager has explicitly said this is okay. I honestly am not even thinking this is an ethical dilemma.
Absolutely, yeah. Not even thinking this is an ethical dilemma. Why is it an ethical dilemma?
I was going to say that there was a company that I was doing some consulting work for where the CEO was actually fired for this because he was doing it on a regular basis and doing deals that cost $1,000.
Yes. Okay, all right, so maybe it's okay if you don't do too much of it. Oh, I think that's called the slippery slope, Manny. Isn't that the slippery slope? Anybody else want to weigh in? Let's practice. Use your tools. What is the descriptive approach? You're looking for norms and standards, right? So we're looking around, and what I'm hearing is that this is done, right? How many of you, just in general, I sometimes say these things, and you wouldn't believe I hear bad things. I don't want to hear anything. But in general, how many of you have experienced or seen this kind of behavior? All right. So why have I posed this as an ethical dilemma? What's wrong with this?
If the luncheon truly included a business purpose, and it was not just a group of folks that happened to work together eating a meal, then you truly don't have a dilemma. The problem is that's just simply a group of people going to lunch.
So you want it to be associated with a business purpose. Sometimes my students will say, well, it's, builds teamwork. That's the other, it's very collegial. But, Manny's saying it's not the purpose of the money.
Well, the fact that the manager is partaking in the meal and then asking somebody else to pay for it so that he'll sign off on it. Like, there's a conflict of interest.
Conflict of interest, good. We have a conflict of interest popping up. We got one behind right over there.
Yeah. You touched on it in a second there. It's what the money was earmarked for by the company. It was earmarked for client entertainment, not for staff entertainment. Different budgets, different uses of funds.
Okay, so all of you went right to the number 2 on that prescriptive, which was the duty, right? You went down the duty. What is the duty of the manager here to, and your answer is, this is not a duty of care for the organization, right? And maybe there are some consequences. We didn't talk about that. But you also spoke to the motivation. That's that third tool, right? The motivation behind this. It seems like it's motivated by a hungry department manager there, right? And what makes this a little scary too is, remember we said, what are the precursors to unethical behaviors? And then it was performance pressures, but then remember number 2 was your peer. The behaviors of your peers or your superiors will dictate what you do. Okay, let's try another one real quick, because then I think, how much more time do I have? Oh, excellent. All right, here, we'll go way in the back over here. Wake somebody up over here. Manny was falling asleep, but I got him to wake up over there. All right, would you like to? Let me see, which one do you have? Oh, yeah, okay. Excuse me, sorry.
You've just been.
Oh, get those glasses out, yeah.
This way I'll read it correctly. You've just cemented a deal between a $100 million pension fund and a green company. A large regional money manager. You and your staff put in long hours and a lot of effort to close the deal, and you're feeling good about it. You and 3 of your direct reports are having lunch in a fancy restaurant to celebrate a promotion when the waiter brings you the phone. A senior account executive from Green is on the phone and wants to buy you lunch in gratitude for all of your efforts. I'll leave my credit card number with the restaurant owner, he says. You and your team have a great time on me. Is this okay? What would you do?
Is it okay? Big deal just went down. This is a thanks. Got one right down there. Again, under the descriptive approach, we know there's nothing illegal about that, right? We're looking at norms and standards. That seems to be a practice. I've been privy to that too, when someone wanted to buy me dinner when I finished a big consulting.
I think it also calls into question about who has ownership of whatever that benefit is. Is it the individual employee or is it the company? And confession, I went through something with that like about 10 years ago or so when my daughter was 1.5 years old, and as appreciation of closing the deal, the client offered to give us offered to give us tickets to see Tickle Me Elmo live at Madison Square Garden.
Oh, nice.
I looked it up online. I saw tickets were $15 each, so my wife, myself, and our first daughter or so, turned around, told my CFO and COO, and asked him, this belongs to the company, should I reimburse the company? He said, no, go ahead. The tickets come in the mail afterwards. They are front row tickets that are probably a couple $100 each. I go back to my CFO and COO, and full disclosure, tell him, John, it turns out these are front row tickets. These are $200 each. He said, we'll authorize it, go ahead, but thank you for telling me. Some people thought I went overboard or so, but there is a certain ethical culture that as CPAs we have to attend to.
Yes. Any comments? So you got your okay. You were able to justify because you went back and got the okay, right? Under the consequences, there were limited consequences as a result, so you were able to kind of make sure there weren't any significant consequences with there. Did you violate any duty? When we're using corporate resource, when we're given something and it involves a corporate transaction, who do we have to think about? The shareholders, right? So oftentimes when I'm putting these dilemmas together, I throw in another layer. So for example, with the first one when we were talking about going to the restaurant, how about then if you're offered stock in the company? Do you then go along with the manager who says, it's on you this month, it's on you that month, we got money left on there? Does that change your thought process? It shouldn't, but it does a little, right? That's what we do actually with CEO pay, right? We try to align pay for performance to make CEOs, to incentivize CEOs to think like shareholders, right? The use of shareholder money. Let's try one more dilemma. Wait, where's PJ? PJ? JP? Russell Reynolds? Oh, he's not here. I was gonna pick on him. We had an email conversation. Let's, who wants it? Would you like to pick? Okay. Maybe that's it. I hope that's not the same one. I keep putting them back in. Oh, this is good. Go ahead.
Okay, you were recently promoted to manager of a department with 5 professionals and 2 clerical staff. One of the professionals, Joe, is a nice guy, but he simply has not been able to match the performance of the others in the department. When he tells you he has been interviewing for another job in a different part of the company, you pull his personnel file and see that your predecessor rated Joe's performance as good to excellent. You frankly disagree. Joe has asked you for a recommendation. Based on the written appraisals, you could give him a good one, but your personal observation is at odds with the written evaluations. Joe's prospective manager, which is your peer in another department, asks for your opinion. What do you say and what values are at stake here?
Ruh-roh. That's easy. Oh, Connie says it's easy. Connie, you spoke up, so you get the mic. Why is it easy, Connie?
Well, first of all, I'd go back to the individual that I've been working with, and I would discuss my observations. And I would say to them, I've been asked my opinion. And, you know, my opinion is not equivalent to the opinions of your predecessor. You know, my opinion is this, and this is what I'll be telling this individual.
So you're trying to be fair, right? That's one of the values that we're talking about. You're trying to be honest, so that's one of the values we're talking about. Would you, and I think that's great, Connie, that's you're fair and honest, but you know what I'm thinking? Boot that baby to the curb. Get that person out of my department. Get them over to someone else's department.
Well, the problem is, in 3 months, that person's going to see exactly what you saw. They're going to come back to you and say, why didn't you tell me this?
Right.
And, you know, you can certainly boot it up to HR, but I think your first responsibility is to speak with your direct report and inform them of your experience.
Sure.
Maybe they have a personal situation that has changed their behavior and have an explanation for it. So, you know, just to...
There's an opportunity
Right.
to approach this with a fairness, right? But the standards and norms that exist, we've seen that there have been some standards within the organization that have not been applied across different divisions, right? So that's where you would go to first on the standards, on the descriptive. There's some problems there. And then on the woulda, shoulda, couldas, right? On the prescriptive side of things, what should we do? Well, we've got a duty. Connie, you were talking about the duty not only to the employee, but to the organization, right? That duty of care kind of thing. And then on the consequence side of things, we want to make sure we're not giving what's-his-face a good recommendation in the next unit, because that could come back on us, right? But then there's the motivation part too. What was the motivation? Is there a motivation story here? Again, I spoke to the fact that maybe I just want to get him out of my area, or her. Right? So again, going through those 3 exercises will help us decide what we should do. Now, these are simple exercises. This one was in the HR arena. Remember, I told you the HR area is the #1 spot for entry-level employees to come into their first ethical dilemma, right? And then, of course, some of these other areas, mergers and acquisitions, negotiations, open up the door, the context for some more complicated ethical dilemmas. Now, I'm going to go back to my slides, if you will. One of the things we want to keep in mind, I told you I waved the CSR flag as well, is that ethics is just really one element of an organization's overall corporate social responsibility. Too often times when I say CSR, people think, oh, giving money away or sending volunteers out with t-shirts to clean up Boston. But in essence, ethics, again, is part of strategy, and it's also part of a good corporate social responsibility platform. And look at what we have there. Economic, legal, ethical, and philanthropic. All 4 components. Ethics gets lost in the mix sometimes. And guess what else does? Economic. Because a business has to. They have to. It is expected. It is required that businesses perform their economic responsibilities. It is required that businesses obey the law. It is expected that they'll be ethical, and it is desired that they'll be philanthropic. Of course, some of the ethical dilemmas that we've seen today shows the tensions, the problems, the tensions that occur along the way here, right? We've mentioned the economic, making money over here, and some things like safety and honesty and transparency over here. So this is the challenge even within the CSR platform. There are some practical ethical tests you've probably heard about. What is the common sense thing to do here? What would I do in my best self? What if I made this public and vented it? It would ventilate it, you know what I mean? Would it be okay? But remember I said that you were cooked? Your moral development levels are cooked? Well, that was actually phrased by, not cooked, but a psychologist named Kohlberg actually staged these stages of moral development. And I like this quote, though. The actual moral decision in an ethical dilemma is not as important as the reasoning process used to arrive at it. Connie, you did a nice job on the reasoning process. And when you made your comments throughout the audience, you were using a reasoning process in those 3 areas: duties, consequences, and integrity, the motivations. Look at the problem from the position of others affected by it, determine the virtuous, that was that 3rd category, the virtuous response, and see if it's consistent with your goals. It sounds trite, but it works. So if you do this well, guess what? You will arrive to that level 5 leadership that we pointed out. And that's what I got. So there you go.